Okay, back at you for a small life update. Still in Berlin, almost done with the manuscripts for the fiction book. Trying to think of how to get funding or money for 2 short scripts I'm trying to turn into short films. Starting to apply for PhDs, questioning whether or not I want to be in certain places in the world, mostly for the time being, the US, question mark, but also other spots anyway. Mojo is good, although I really can start feeling that Berlin in the winter is probably hard to romanticize. Might be surprised soon, but that's the vibe I get so far. Also, I must say though that I'm just not like actively trying to make it romantic in a way that I'm really stuck on those current deadlines right now of like projects and things. So I'm not, harvesting the romantic power that the city could offer. I'm sure there is, but we'll figure it out at some point. It's just that right now I'm not activating that part of like the city. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to do a small pitch today is, not only to update a little bit what's going on with this project, but also I want to share some thoughts on demystification of the process or demystification as empowerment. And what do I mean by that? Well, I have started this small workshop course called Critical Writing Workshop. And it's a small course that I somewhat implemented because throughout the years, some people were asking me, how do I research, how do I write, etc. So I thought, okay, maybe now I feel comfortable enough sharing some of my processes, some of my insights, some of my methodologies, etc. Not that I'm doing anything, particularly, let's say, grandiose, but I was just thinking if people are interested, I'm happy to explain. So I pull up with this course/workshop, and it gets me into this mode of thinking where I'm thinking, okay, what are the steps? What are the tools? What are the ways I stayed motivated? What are the, imaginary pipelines and deadlines I have to come up, for myself? What are the ways in which I utilize research to go into fiction and fiction to go into research and movies going into books and research going into movies, blah, 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 blah. And what I'm doing when I'm doing this, basically, as I'm sitting and, sort of like dissecting my process and also explaining it to others, well, you're demystifying the process, right? You're basically saying, oh, wait, there's like a systemic ritual / consistency / very precise almost movement in it, right? And I was never someone who mystified the process myself. I was never someone who mystified really, I wouldn't say art in general, but for example, I'm going to illustrate that. I've never been a fangirl of anybody in particular. Like there's not like this one specific musician or poet or artist. Like I do sometimes really appreciate some things, and I do have a lot of admiration, but not to the point of fangirling. And I think this is because in me, from quite a young age, because I have, parents who really are like super hardcore, specifically my dad, methodology, work alcoholism, etc. I always guessed and supposed that whomever is doing some very complex thing is just working a lot. Like for me, it just made sense. It's the only possible way I could understand that situation. That being said, some people are just geniuses. There's nothing to, argue against here. But I just always assume that most of the case when people are extremely talented or extremely successful or when they have accomplished very beautiful, big project, I'm just always thinking they must be sick in the brain. So sick in the brain as in like obsessed to some extent with what they wanted to do and working consistently on it. So going back to the idea of demystifying the process, I was never really myself into this sort of like magic secrecy of what it's like to be an artist, a writer. Like I just never really like partook into this kind of myth making because I knew deep down that whatever I was doing it. Well, most of the time I didn't know what I was doing, but I was just really obsessed. And I would not... Basically, if I said I would do something, I would not do it. And this applied to many areas of my life, but also projects. No matter the money incentives, no matter the, time on my plate, etc. And that being said, I want to say here that the education I received and this kind of like work rigor is a privilege that I inherited from my parents. It's not something that, I developed myself. Something I've been gifted, quote unquote. So it's not even that I am responsible for my own discipline. Like the ecology and the environment in which I grew up in is responsible for my discipline to some extent. But so as I'm presenting, my research process, how I work, how I imagine all these research ideas being connected so I can sustain this pipeline of research and creativity, the people that I share this with are telling me, it's great to see this because sometimes it's so abstract or secretive, or we don't really know how people do it or how they imagine these pipelines around their research. And, when I got this feedback, it got me thinking really like, yeah, there's definitely, beyond the mystification of like artistic, critical or intellectual processes, which I think is great, like there should be some kind of like glamour around it. There is a sort of strange hierarchy that seems to appear in between people where some people are like, I cannot do it. I'm not, talented enough, genius enough, I'm not creative enough, like whatever. But actually, if more people shared their processes and demystified the way they work, one would realize that it's not complicated, but there is just a recipe for things. And I think that the more we share a recipe for things with others, which for me is just really a way to just share what we know, share how we do things, and be transparent about it, I think it really empowers other people to feel like they can do it too, and then it gives, hopefully, confidence and playfulness to, let's say, the playground of experimentation. I've been also thinking about myth a lot lately because it's related to one of the topic of PhD I'm considering, and I'm following a class from the New Research Center on mythologies of the West, and it's called White World, Lost Land, and it's about all the myths that the West came up with as they colonized the world to justify, higher races, higher forms of individuals, etc. Super problematic, but anyway. So with these different things piling up in front of me, I started to think really about like the importance of demystification, not only to just deconstruct it and then be left with nothing, but just to really understand the mechanics of a story, the mechanics of a project, and then give those mechanics away to the power and the possibilities of other people, so more individuals can feel inclined to participate in the making of art, stories, history, tales, etc. Yeah. It's been a very interesting process, this writing class for me. Yeah, to so many extent. I think next semester I would like to produce one course that would be more on fiction and storytelling, I hope some people would also be interested in that, because I was surprised. I didn't know that so many people would be interested in critical writing, but of course that's, mostly what I've done so far. So of course the people who followed me or follow my work were interested in that. But I think now that I want to focus, let's say, in an equal amount of energy into not science fiction, but more like fiction, storytelling, short movies, etc. I also hope that by the time I publish more fiction, I will be able to also demystify the process of how I do that with other people. Yeah. Anyway, I would say long life to learning, teaching, demystifying the process, and romanticizing European cities in the winter, even though you really don't know how to do that.